All right, my friends, welcome back to another one. Today we will be talking about position property. The previous video we learned about the display property. We said position and display are the core and fundamental properties of CSS layout, and CSS layout is more or less the only complicated part of CSS. So as you can see here, I have a little document that I want you to read on position. As we can see here, every element by default in HTML is positioned statically, so position static is the default, and that means that we can't use these offsets that we're going to work with in a moment. Then we have relatively positioned elements, which are very similar to statically positioned elements, but you can in fact use offsets. And then we have a little bit more aggressive, or to say way more aggressive values for the position. We have the absolute, we have the fixed, and we have the sticky ones. So let's start with just the static ones, right? So I'm going to go to my index.html here, and as always, I'm going to create two boxes, as we always do. I'm going to call it box 1, and I'm going to say box 2, right? So, and then we're going to go over here, and we're going to define this box. I'm going to say that it's width of 150, height of 150, and then I'm going to color these boxes differently. So I'm going to say box and child 1. I'm going to say that this is let's say crimson, and I'm going to do this the same with the second box. I'm going to give it some color, so I'm going to say here 2, and I'm going to say maybe violet or whatever. So if we get over here, we're going to have two boxes. I want these boxes to be next to each other, so I'm going to say that they're of type display inline block. So I'm going to say display inline block. And now we can kind of work with the position. So as I said, if I inspect this element, you can see that all elements by default in HTML and CSS are relative. So if I search for position here, you can see here that the position is static. Did I just say relative? If I did, my apologies. So every element in HTML by default is static. That means that we can't use these offsets. What does that mean? Well, if I come to this violet box here and I try to say top 50, left 50, you will notice that nothing's gonna happen because this is statically positioned element by default. If I come over here, you can see that also Chrome developer tools are gonna warn me, and they're gonna say, hey, the position static property prevents stop from having an effect. It is gonna say the same for the left property as well, right? So if I now go to this violet box and I say position relative, it's gonna be different. We're gonna push this box. And this box now can be pushed in any direction. We can use -50, we can use whatever we want. So now I'm pushing it in a different direction. You can also see that this box now is kind of going outside of our viewport. We're going to discuss viewport in 1 or 2 videos, but it's basically the purple box, the violet box is leaving our available web page area, the area where your website is visible, right? So you can see that the positioning relative enables you to really move the element in any direction you want in a very easy way, right? If I create another box here, box 3, and I just do something similar to this, I'm just gonna color it in some other color. So let's just say here yellow, green, for example. You will notice that, and we need to do the selector properly, you will notice that with the relatively positioned elements, the document flow is intact. So in simple words, even though we are moving this relatively positioned element now in any direction, you will notice that this space that this element reserved and occupied is not freed or in fact changed at all. So in simple words, even if I do some super radical thing and I completely move this element out of the document view, you will notice that the relatively positioned element still preserves its space in the document flow. So in simple words, it's not very aggressive. You can still use it in to do, let's say, tiny things. Maybe you wanted to move this box, you know, just 4 pixels from the left, right? So maybe you just wanted to do something very, very small. So this is incredibly important to remember. And it's important to remember because you're going to see how absolutely positioned elements now work. They are in fact removed from the flow. So if I come here and I just move this element, I just set this box to absolutely positioned element, look what happens. What just happened is that this green box that we just saw here, it's unaware that this purple box exists. It's unaware because, again, absolutely positioned elements are removed from the document flow, which means other elements are unaware of their existence. So you can see, actually, if you don't believe me, if I take this absolutely positioned element now, this one, and I move it somewhere, I say top 50, you will notice that the box 3 is indeed below it, right? So you will notice that but absolutely positioned elements are a lot more aggressive. Basically, the absolutely positioned elements enable you to move and put things somewhere on the screen without worrying about the rest of the things, right? So for example, let's imagine that this was your title and you wanted to put some icon or something. And let's imagine that in this box 3 you had some span. Let's imagine this is an icon that says X, like close. I want to close this. You see this icon now, right? So I could potentially set this green thing to relative, and that's what we're going to speak in a second. So let's just leave that there. So as you can see, position absolute is a lot more aggressive than position relative, because absolutely positioned elements are removed from the document flow. But there's one little confusing thing here and one exception that we have to understand now. Absolutely positioned elements are relative to the they're contained, they're tamed inside of the relative container. So in most cases, whenever we use position absolute, we will use that element. We're going to set position absolute on elements which are inside of the relative containers. So basically, you could say that the absolutely positioned elements are relative to the closest relative container. So in simple words, these offsets that we use are going to be relative to the element in which, to the relative element in which absolutely positioned element is. Let me actually explain it. It's very confusing when I explain it that way. So let me show you. So if I, so actually before we do that, so if I say here top 0 and let's say right 0, look what happens. So you can see that this purple box, this absolutely positioned element, is now positioning itself. So top, left, and bottom right is now the document, this outer document, our whole document. So if I say top 0, left 0, that's going to be X and Y axis of this whole page, because we are not containing this absolutely positioned element in a relative container, right? But let me show you one thing. If I create some other unrelated div here, so I say here something like, let's call this relative container. And inside of there, I'm gonna move this this box, right? So I'm gonna do this a little bit different. So I'm gonna put this, let's say I'm gonna put this box in there, and then I'm gonna change the selector a little bit. So I'm gonna say here relative container, and then I'm gonna say box, right? Something like this. Okay, not much has changed, but let's now add some styling to this relative container. So I'm gonna say this. I'm gonna say width 300, height 300. Then I'm gonna say position relative. So let's see what happened. Now let's add a background to this guy. Background color, let's say yellow. So let's see where's, so this is our container now, and let's push this container a little bit from everything else. I'm gonna say margin 20 pixels. So look what happened now. So this is pretty much the only confusing things about the relation between position relative and absolute. So you can see now that this purple box is no longer setting itself, let's say if I say top 0, left 0, it's not setting itself anymore to this X and Y axis of the whole document. Now it's setting itself top 0, left 0 of its relative container. So you can see in here, if I actually set this to 10 and 10, let's say 10px, you will notice that we're pushing this purple box now 10 from the left and 10 from the top, right? So you can see how incredibly important this is. In most cases, in 99, actually always, I've never, in more than 15 years of my career doing this, I've never used position absolute that wasn't contained by some container. And let me show you why that is, right? So remember this icon example that we just had. Let's construct a different example here. So let's imagine that this yellow box was our some sort of modal, something that you like alert or something that you get in your face, and then you wanted to have an icon somewhere around here. Let me show you how you would do that. So what I'm actually gonna do, I'm gonna remove this box and I'm just gonna add a span here, and I'm gonna say, I don't know, X. Let's imagine this is our icon. And let's imagine I wanted to set this icon somewhere around this corner, right? Like a little bit outside. I wanted to position it a little bit outside of the box, right? So how would I do that? Well, actually, I would come here And here I'll just say span, and what I can actually do, because this now is inside of this yellow box, which is position relative, I can just say now something like this. I can say top 0 or top -10, and I can say, let's say, right 0. Sorry, I can say right 0. So as you can see now I can position this anywhere I want. I can actually say -5 pixels. And now I have my X here, right? So you could not do this without position property, because, you know, this is kind of coming outside of the document flow, because this X really is not in this document. This document is oblivious to that, right? If I wanted to kind of do a little bit more, -50 and -10, right? You see now we have this X in here, right? If this relative container, this yellow box, wasn't position relative, if I remove this, look what happens with this X now. We don't even know where it is. So, but if we can assume where it is, it's somewhere in the top outside of the screen. Let me show you. So if I remove this minus, look where the X is, right? So the X now left the yellow box, because yellow box is no longer a relative container. So in simple words, you always have to have a relative container for the absolutely positioned elements, so you can tame them, so you can tell them, hey, this is your parent. So when I say top or left or right or bottom, I mean relative to me, relative to where I am, not to the whole page, right? So you see, once I move make this yellow box position relative, now this absolutely positioned element is contained with this yellow box, right? So this is the only kind of a little bit confusing thing if you ever work with position absolute, because position absolute is in most cases useless if you don't do this, because you never want to position some element according to the whole page. That makes no sense. You will always have some container that's gonna then contain this. So that's really about the position absolute. And now we have two more, fixed and sticky, and they're very similar. So let's work with those. So position sticky and position relative are basically elements that keep things in place. If I actually go to Programmer Network or TechCrunch or whatever, let's find some examples where this. So you can see this element in the top, this navigation bar, is fixed in place. So as I scroll, it's always staying there. If I go to the dashboard on Programmer Network, you can see this sidebar here. It's also pretty much static in place, so it's not moving, right? It's always there. If we go to TechCrunch magazine, for example, and you can see that they have this menu in here, if I scroll, it's fixed in place. You see they have this cookie banner, or some register banner here in the bottom. You can see if we scroll, not this element is fixed. So that's what fixed is for. Let's actually implement that a little bit ourselves, right? So what I'm gonna do here, I'm gonna create some sort of a top navigation. So I'm gonna say nav. And I'm gonna create just some fake menu. I'm gonna say by 4 and then a lorem 1. And then I'm gonna create some sidebar as well. So I'm gonna say here, I'm gonna use HTML5 semantic tags. So all of these are HTML5 semantic tags nav and aside, and we're gonna learn about those as we build things. And then I'm gonna do the same. I'm pretty much gonna do the same here. So if I come here, we have nothing meaningful, right? And let's start designing this. So I'm going to say nav now here, and I'm going to say position fixed. I'll say background color. We're going to use some very radical colors just so we can see things on the screen. So I'm going to use chocolate. If we get over here, nothing's going to change yet, because we also used a dot nav instead of nav. So as you can see, nothing has actually changed yet. So I'm going to say here now top 0. Left 0, and I'm gonna say width 100%. I want this to span 100% of the page. Don't worry, we're about to do CSS units in the next video, I believe. So we're gonna discuss percentages, rems, EMs, and pixels. So as you can see here, we're almost there to fixate this. The only thing I'm gonna do now, I'm gonna just make sure that these ULs are of display inline block, because I want them to be next to each other. So I'm gonna do this. And let's make sure that that's what we have. No, we have nav ul li, so my bad. So we need to make these list items to be right. So now we have a fixed element. How do we know it's fixed? Well, actually, let me show you. If I go now here and create a bunch of I create super large paragraphs, 1,000 words, you can see now as I scroll, we're having our menu stay in the top, right? Let's do the same with this aside, with this other menu, this sidebar that we wanted to create, right? I'm gonna minimize this. So we have this aside, and we're gonna do the same. I'm pretty much almost gonna do the same here. I'm gonna say aside, We don't need to do this. And it's going to be fixed. I'm going to use a different color. I'm going to say crimson, for example. And we're going to say left 0. And width, I'm going to say that this is width of like 250 pixels or whatever. So let's see what happens. So we have it here. And I'm going to say that the height of this is 100 view height. So again, we're going to do the units soon, so don't worry too much about it, right? So as you can see now, we have this. Let's make it a little bit smaller, 150 pixels. So you can see we have the sidebar, and as you can see, and we also could use a top 0, so this menu starts on the top. So we're going to say top 0. And now as you can see, we probably want this chocolate color to start here where this menu ends, right, horizontally. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to say that the left, push this chocolate left to the width of this side. So I'm going to say here left 150 px, right? And now as you can see, now we have super easy. So now we have recreated pretty much this menu on TechCrunch, this thing on the left. And then we have recreated some stuff from Programming. So as you can see, now we have simple. And also, of course, we need with our content here, with this, let's just put this in some sort of a div that says content. And I'm going to say here that the content as well should be pushed from the left. So I'm going to say here margin left, 170 pixels, just so there's a little bit of a spacing here. And so now as you can see, we have a super simple website where you can just scroll and you're gonna have these menus in place, right? So this is really one of the most used places for fixed elements, right? You can see these elements are now completely removed from the document flow. Very important. So unlike static and relative, fixed behaves very similar to the absolutely positioned elements in that sense that they're removed from the document flow. As you can see, other elements are completely oblivious to this. You can see that this text doesn't know that these elements are here. They're for other elements which are of position static, these two elements don't exist on the page. They're just gone. They're not there, right? You can also see now that this text is basically, this is a good example. You can see how it goes behind this menu now, because yeah, it doesn't know that this menu exists, right? So I'm also gonna say here margin top, let's say 50 or like 100 pixels, I don't know, just so this text is, has some spacing, so now we can actually fully see it. Let's reduce that maybe to 50 pixels, right? Now let's say 70, and now it's a little bit better, right? So fixed elements are used in 99.9% use cases in the web for menus, footers, things that you want to kind of overlap other elements. We could do the same with the footer. I could literally take this nav that we have and name it a footer. So what I'm gonna do, I'm literally gonna take this nav, I'm gonna move it to the bottom of this page, and I'm gonna use HTML5 semantic tag called footer. There's literally an element in HTML5 called footer, and I'm gonna do exactly this. I'm gonna copy this stuff here, literally, and I'm just gonna replace this nav with footer. And look what happens. We just need to move this instead of top, we have to say bottom. And boom, now we have our footer as well. It's set in place. Let's give it a different color. Let's say violet. And as you can see, now we have the footer fixed in place. You can see how easy it is. You're just basically playing with the offsets, top, left, bottom, and right. So this is a fixed element. And now, lastly, we have a sticky element, basically, and sticky behaves very similar. And position sticky was the latest. It was the element that came last in the position family. We haven't had it for many years, and it behaves very similar to the fixed element, with the exception that it actually reacts to the scroll. So let me show you. So if I get over here somewhere to, let's say, below the nav, so somewhere here in the content, I'm gonna create something called, I don't know, content box, whatever, something generic, and I'm just gonna say lorem1, and I'm gonna come here and I'm gonna say content box, and I'm gonna style it. I'm gonna say width, 200, height, I don't know, 100, and I'm gonna say background color dark olive green. So let's see, the box is now here. What happens if we set this to position sticky? So So if I just do this and I leave it as this, nothing's gonna happen because we need to use the offsets. But let's see what happens if I say top, let's say 20 pixels. So now if I start scrolling, you can see that this box, once it hits the offset, it's gonna stay in place. It's gonna basically stay fixed. So as you can see, this element is more or less behaving like a combination of relative and fixed element. So as long as there's no scroll or not for this sticky element to react to, it's gonna behave like a relative element. But once we start scrolling, you can see that this element stays in place. When is this useful? This is also useful for various types of menus. Let's imagine that we wanted this to be a sub-menu of this. We want this to stay here, but once you actually start scrolling, we always want it to be visible. Let me show you. So let's imagine that we wanted to say something like this. I'm gonna copy some styles from here. So I'm gonna copy this like this, and I'm gonna paste it here in this, let's call this a sub-menu of some sort. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna say something like this. Let's see, yes. Width left 150, blah blah blah. So as you can see, when I said left, so you can see this element, since it's not fixed or absolutely positioned, we can't do crazy things with it. So this element now is behaving like a relative element once without the scroll. But once you start scrolling, then it's gonna start behaving as a fixed element. So here we can say top 0, for example. And as you can see now, if I start scrolling, this is gonna get stuck to the top of this. So look, boom, it stays in place. So again, you're going to be using this, and we're going to use all of these things. So at the end of this kind of section of CSS, this intro to CSS, we will build a whole full-fledged layout, and I'm going to make sure to have a use case where we use all of these things. Pretty much set box model, every single thing we've learned so far. So don't worry too much about it. We're going to have some tangible examples that I will have to create. But as you can see, this is quite an awesome property because it enables us to build layouts that react to the scroll position as well. So as you can, once you start scrolling this element, you're saying, hey, I want you to become sticky once you hit the offset, basically, right? And I could have also done the same. I could have said something like bottom 0, bottom 50, right, as well. Bottom 50 pixels. So if I do this now, let's see, yeah, actually nothing's gonna happen because the example doesn't make much of a sense. Okay, so I think with that said, let's just recap. Fixed elements are used mostly for menus. I've yet to see any other use case in all these years. Sticky elements are used for the same purpose, but they can be used for many other things as well, so it's up to you to build clever layouts. But as you can see, they're mostly used when you want something to still stay in the visible viewport once you scroll, right? This element could have been also here on the bottom. It could have started here, and then once you got to a certain point of your scroll, you could have had it there. Sticky is also used a lot in conjunction with JavaScript, so you will notice in some time from now that there are many tricks you can use when combining CSS and JavaScript together to create some very crazy things. So sticky, position sticky is really powerful once you also know JavaScript, once you can kind of do a little bit more complicated things. Position relative, as we said, is the same almost as position static, with the exception that two exceptions, it works with, actually one exception, it works with the offsets. And if you remember, position relative does respect the document flow, so it doesn't disrupt it. Unlike position absolute and fixed, that actually once you set the elements to these things, they are pretty much removed from the document flow, meaning other elements are unaware of that. So this kind of marks the position property here. Please go read the where is it, position property document here. Play with this. You need to do pretty much what I did. Try to build a layout like this, the menus, blah blah blah. And then in the next video, I believe we're going to continue with the CSS units, viewport, colors, and then we're going to build a huge layout together. I'm going to find some template online, and then we're going to try to incorporate all of these things that we worked with so far. I wish you guys best. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you up in another one. Have a great one. Peace out. Bye bye.